speak with the very people who play the game day in, day out, the footballers. They know better than anyone what is needed based on their own personal experiences. And that information can be utilized to help those in the wider context within the industry to bring about such things as innovation, the enhancement of player performance, player development, or even the overall growth of the football industry. That's why collaboration and open lines of communication are so important. Feedback, input, insights that are so very invaluable. And just to hammer home the idea here, when properly taken into account, can go a long way in designing new initiatives that will drive collective growth and success. Player insights, shaping the future development of the football industry, a compelling conversation brought to you in collaboration with FIFPro. So please allow me to welcome onto the stage now your next guest for a fabulous panel. Maheta Molango, Chairman of the PFA, David Aganzo, President of FIFPro, Jerome Perlemuter, General Secretary at World Leagues Forum, and Rede Luis Baez, who apparently didn't have enough, decided he wanted to have another go as moderator for this one, founder and chief connections builder of The Connect. A double serving for you today, my friend.
Yeah,
have a wonderful time.
Thank you, Zemra. Thank you, good afternoon to all for being here, and thank you to our distinguished panelists to join us. Basically, what we are witnessing here is some of the top representatives of a very important part of the industry that we all love and actually work in. And I would say personally that I think is one of the most noble endeavors, which is actually defending, protecting, organizing the workforce of an industry. So the conversations that we'll be having now are predicated on the insight on player performance and player interactions with the game and with their own self. And if you remember in some panels before, we were talking about the data use and what for. This is a very key part because, as you will see in this conversation, we will be attacking the conversation about players in the game of football from different perspectives. So at first, I wanted to start with a topic which is very common. And actually, if you follow international sports industry news, you'll see that this word has been used quite a lot recently, especially around basketball and the NBA. I'm a basketball guy, so that's why I tend to drag everything there, which is workload and player workload. We enjoy football as fans. The players enjoy football as fans, but as workers as well. So I will want to give the floor first. We can start with Maeta to actually be able to define what is your perspective from the position that you hold in terms of how things are being managed in terms of player workload and how the relationship, the working relationship with players manifests in terms of competition calendars, organization, and everything that it entails, right?
Thank you, Raide. Well, I think for us, the starting point is that whatever view we're going to share today is not my view, but rather the view of the players. I think we've been obsessed about understanding what they thought was important to them, and basically what we've done is spend a lot of time going to the dressing room and talking to them. So I go myself every summer to every single dressing room in the Premier League to just introduce myself, introduce the PFA, and ask them, what do you care about? What are you concerned about? And the reality has been that I've been doing that for 2 years now, since I joined the PFA, and the number one topic which keeps coming back is the calendar. Is we play too many games, we're not able to give the best version of ourselves, and I think this is a topic where you can take two angles. You can either look at this from the perspective of the player welfare, which obviously is the one that we want to take, i.e., to me, it's a pity to go and see a Champions League final where Haaland, who's one of the best players in the world, does not give the best version because he's tired. It's a pity to see De Bruyne, who's the top players, after 30 minutes not able to continue because he's injured. It's a pity to see Rodri after 60 minutes saying that he's got cramps. So from a player welfare perspective, it's a shame because the player is a fan himself and he wants to show his family, his friends that he's the best, and they're not able to do that right now. But if you take a different angle, which is the one maybe shared by some of you guys in the room, if you only want to look at this from a commercial perspective, in my opinion, what is happening is that we are killing the product football. We play too many games, meaning the quality drops. It means that the audience is not happy. It means that along the line, I think at some stage, people will no longer play for that lower quality product that right now we have on display. And that's what I'm obsessed about telling people, which is even if you don't care about the actual welfare of the players, you are killing the quality of the show, and hence you're killing the product. And I'd love to continue working football for the next 30 years. But at this rate, I'm not sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll switch to Spanish to also address David, which I think would be easier. David, en las relaciones laborales, bueno, sois exfutbolistas, pero en las relaciones laborales ahora, en vuestro puesto, el equilibrio, la búsqueda del equilibrio con las competiciones, llámese ligas o federaciones, y los estamentos que representan, ¿no? de jugadores, ese tema, como decía Maeta ahora, el calendario es casi central. Luego hay temas adyacentes, ¿no? Como las condiciones laborales a nivel de infraestructura para la preparación y el cuidado de los atletas, los viajes, etcétera, etcétera. ¿Cómo abordáis esa conversación de una forma constructiva, entendiendo ese equilibrio, ¿no? El hecho de que esto es un negocio basado en pasión, la gente quiere ver a sus jugadores, pero además necesitamos maximizar, ¿no? la capacidad productiva del ecosistema en general.
Buenas tardes a todos. Raed, muchas gracias por estar aquí presente. Y bueno, es un placer estar con Jerón y con Maeta, dos personas que conocen muy bien la industria del fútbol. Y bueno, sobre lo que me preguntas, creo que una de las claves la ha dado Maeta. El calendario internacional, el calendario dentro de esa liga nacional, creo que es muy importante para los futbolistas. Estamos hablando de protección. El sindicato FIFPro, como todos sabéis, es un sindicato a nivel mundial, donde representan más de 70 países en todo el mundo, donde hay más de 70.000 jugadores y jugadoras dentro de ese sindicato. Maeta es presidente CEO de la PFA de Inglaterra, yo soy de España y de FIFPro. Y sobre la pregunta que me haces, al final, bueno, el calendario, lógicamente, en esa protección en todos los niveles del futbolista o de la futbolista, está claro que la parte de salud, de competición, es muy importante. Nos hemos dado cuenta, tanto en Inglaterra como en España, que son los dos casos que voy a hablar siempre aquí, ya que estamos presentes, una de las preocupaciones que tienen nuestros compañeros es ese calendario internacional, esas competiciones que deben de modificarse para que sean mucho más actuales y se piense en el que es realmente el verdadero protagonista, que es la jugadora y el jugador. Y en eso estamos, tanto con Wellbeing Forum, que luego hablará Jerón, en la parte de las ligas, porque al final queremos ligas muy potentes que puedan a nivel nacional competir para poder seguir mejorando este deporte. Queremos clubs que tengan capacidad económica, lógicamente, para otra parte, que son los contratos laborales, esas condiciones que luego hablaremos de ellos, pero sobre todo el tema de la salud. Tanto PFA como AFE tienen diferentes programas de salud que van muy vinculados a esa protección del jugador. Tenemos partes psicológicos, trabajamos con profesionales en la parte de psicología, tenemos diferentes proyectos que van a esa defensa del jugador. Pero sobre todo ese tema del calendario, que puede ser muy preocupante, porque los jugadores de máximo nivel que están jugando diferentes competiciones internacionales, ya sea en el caso, voy a poner casos españoles, sea Real Madrid, Atlético de Madrid, Barcelona, equipos que están jugando Champions, tienen muy poco tiempo de recuperación. Hay que recordar que nuestros compañeros siguen siendo personas, siguen teniendo familias, siguen teniendo esa necesidad de poder estar con sus seres queridos sin olvidar, lógicamente, lo que son profesionales y deben de estar compitiendo, pero ahí es donde está la vinculación y la coordinación entre todas las partes. Tenemos que tener ese equilibrio en lo que llamamos industria y lo que llamamos seguridad y protección del jugador. Lógicamente, cuando hablas con un jugador lo que quiere es jugar, nunca se van a negar a no jugar, pero tenemos casos, como ha dicho Maeta, tema Haaland, yo aquí en España tengo a Courtois, tengo a Carvajal, han salido diferentes entrenadores como Xavi con el tema del calendario, y nosotros como instituciones para proteger a estos futbolistas necesitamos que así sea.
Absolutely. And actually, I'll switch to Jerome now because As I said, I'm from basketball, and since a few years ago, I thought that the basketball world copied the worst that I've experienced as a fan from football, which is the mix of calendar. There are some times that you don't know even which team is playing, which competition, and especially what for. We probably are seeing that overkill now in terms of constant competition, and from the perspective of the players, evidently there's a detriment to the person. From the league's perspective, which evidently your bread and butter is actually putting games together so the fans can enjoy it, how do you approach that conversation?
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to this summit, and a good pleasure again to be with my pals here representing the players the way they do. So as far as the leagues are concerned, you're totally right to say the role of the league is to organize competition and sort of make the best business out of it. But actually a league, and we're representing in the World Leagues Forum around 45 leagues. Some are big, so representing the counterpart of this nice gentleman here, like La Liga and the English Premier League, but also our last member is the League of Botswana. So, you know, it's different perspective. So a league is two things. You're right, it organizes competition and it needs to make the business. And to do this business, you need space in the calendar. So you need to organize matches, like everyone else in this industry. But a league is also the entity that will represent club at domestic level to negotiate with players collective bargaining agreements, meaning the condition on which they're going to sign contract to clubs. And a collective bargaining agreement is a lot of things. It's also about the workloads. It's also about the number of days that you give a player to rest between games, between two seasons, etc. So the league has to take into consideration those two aspects, making money by organizing matches, but at the same time, negotiating with players the condition upon which they will have some rest. Now, the second observation is that when we speak of workload, we need to realize that around the world, as far as I know the latest figures, we have around 140,000 professional players. 140,000 professional players. So top divisions, but not only top divisions. In certain countries, they're professional in lower divisions. And overload is not for this 140,000 players. Out of these players, only 5% play in national teams. And not only the best competitions, but only 5% play on national teams. So it's not a majority. And among these one, then some are going to play like the newly revamped Club World Cup, etc. So overload is not for all players. Another thing, when you look at the number of professional clubs around the world, it's around 4,000, right? Those who play a lot, those clubs who have like a super overloaded calendar, it's not all of them. So when we speak of overload, you know, we need to pay attention to the fact that it concerns a few players. And what we see right now, and I totally concur, but he knows that with what said Maheta and also what said David, is the problem of the current football is that there is a focus on more and more elite matches. More and more elite matches, which means two things. First of all, you dilute the value of football overall, and you dilute the value of elite football by having too much of it. And the second consequence is by having more space to elite football, you don't give enough space to develop the 130,000 players that needs to have space in the calendar. So I think it's a very key matter. It's complex because everyone wants to make money, and that's perfectly normal in this industry. But we only have 365 days a year, and we have to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, you mentioned that the basis of the relationships, labor relationships, are collective bargaining agreements. It's commonplace in many industries. In sports, actually in the US, is really, really commonplace. And actually, it is built over there at least, with a notion that the players are partners of the business. And that is a very important question. And actually I want to open the floor to all of you to be able to tackle that. There's a key component of the amazing number of touch points that we generate as an industry, in general sports, any sports, which is predicated on data. And the ability to be able to track, to follow, to engage, to understand the game, the competitions and what happened through the data. What is the position currently in terms of those CBA conversations between leagues, competitions, and players in regards to who owns the data, who has the right to certain data, and what could be the implications of certain data points when it comes to that labor, let's say, arrangement? I don't know who wants to take first.
Why are you looking at me?
I know you.
Okay, I'm happy to take a stab. Look, I think that the starting point is to really be honest about the fact who holds which right and which rights have been actually given. Let me explain that. So when I was playing as a good journeyman that I was and playing like everywhere and nowhere, the reality that when you got to your club, you're signing a contract which had a clause like this about data, which basically was data linked to your employment contract. Date of birth, place of birth, your kind of bank detail, that was it. So, but that clause remains the same. So the standard contract in the UK, for example, has been the same for God knows how many years. So what is happening now? The players ask me, they're saying, hold on a second, what have I actually signed and what have I actually given to the club or to the league? And the question is, hold on a second, have I given permission for them to use my data for gambling company? Have I given permission for them to use the data for health tracking purposes? Have I given the permission for them to actually use my skeletal information to then develop a very advanced, commercial proposition? And maybe I'm a bit behind in terms of the law, and that's why Jérôme is here to kind of shed some light, but I'm struggling to give them an answer. Because when I look at the clause, I very much doubt that someone could say that that clause implies that all my data will be given to you and you can do whatever you want. And I'll go a step further. Football has evolved in a way where when I was playing, there was no GPS. There was no sleep tracking. There was nothing. Nowadays, the level of oversight and supervision and control the players have is very high. I have very much doubts as to whether this data was ever given permission to access and to use in the way that it is right now. And I think what I'm seeing in the UK is the fact that data protection is very strict. And the reality is that even on the assumption that that authorization was granted, it can be withdrawn. Yep. So this then leads me to a conversation where if we want to work together and grow the pie, amount of money that we receive, then we need to ensure that the commercial partners have legal certainty and security as to what exactly they buy. Hence why I think the future for us is to be able to sit down, having an honest conversation with the clubs and with the leagues and saying, the reality is that you are selling something that you may or may not have, or you may have, but not to the extent that you think you have. And hence, why don't we sit down, try to really give the best level of certainty, then we can go together to commercial partners and hopefully get more money, and then we can talk about how we distribute the money.
Lo hablamos desde el punto de vista comercial, pero David, también desde el punto de vista laboral, ¿qué impacto puede tener un traqueo de data tan profundo respecto de posibles contratos futuros, renovaciones o la relación misma con el jugador, ¿no? ¿Dónde está la línea respecto del bienestar del jugador y que eso a la vez sea un arma en contra del propio jugador respecto de su relación laboral con sus clubes, ¿no?
Sí, así es. Yo siempre he dicho que dentro de la industria del mundo del fútbol, que evoluciona muy rápido, siempre tiene que haber relaciones consolidadas, convenios colectivos dentro del país, que es la protección real de estos trabajadores, de estos futbolistas. El tema de la Big Data es un tema que está de actualidad, que va a ser el futuro, los derechos de imagen, y cada parte se protege cada vez más. Al final, tanto los clubs como los jugadores, como las diferentes entidades que intentan o están dentro de esta industria del mundo del deporte, al final es algo muy claro. Yo creo que la Big Data, como ha dicho Maeta, o la línea es muy fina, dado que los datos que se están manejando, al final los quiere mucha gente, pero al final tienen que tener el consentimiento del jugador, que yo creo que es lo fundamental en esta parte. Al final, la parte importante del jugador que dan, creo que el estudio que hicimos hace poco, sacaron casi 8 millones de datos por compañera en un partido del World Cup en Australia. Entonces, estamos hablando de 8 millones de datos que muchos de ellos pueden ser de una manera públicos, hay otros que tienen que ver con la salud del deportista, hay otros que son como datos más personales. Yo creo que tenemos que poner el límite, tenemos que saber de quién es, tenemos que, lógicamente, tener ese consentimiento del deportista, porque al final ellos deben de saber dónde están todos sus datos. Y tiene que haber alguien que se lo explique, lógicamente como PFA, como AFE, como FIFPro, que somos los sindicatos que estamos lógicamente ayudando en este tema. Sabemos que el futuro está allí, sabemos la preocupación de nuestros compañeros en este tipo de situaciones. Yo creo que la información ahora mismo para muchas partes es desconocida porque hay muchos vacíos legales donde muchas de las partes piensan el tener o bien los derechos de imagen que no tienen nada que ver con el Big Data, ya que es algo más individual, el derecho de imagen es algo un poco más colectivo, pero sí que entiendo que en esa precaución, en esa seguridad que debemos dar la parte sindical o el bando social, creo que estamos trabajando mucho en esta parte, por lo menos PFA hablo mucho con Maeta y sé perfectamente que está en esa preocupación. A nivel FIFPro, por supuesto, y tenemos que saber dónde va, el por qué va, si se van a vender, si no se van a vender. Hay mucha industria dentro del mundo del fútbol que le interesan esos datos. O sea, nos vamos a encontrar situaciones que los videojuegos cada vez son más reales, mucho más exactos, donde dentro de poco se va a poder casi ver las pulsaciones que tiene Benzema tirando un penalti, para que sea mucho más real, y la gente quiere avanzar. Nosotros también queremos avanzar sobre ese tema, pero lo que sí que queremos es que se respeten esos derechos de los futbolistas, de los deportistas, que realmente se sepa y sobre todo que se dé el consentimiento del jugador para que se puedan utilizar a lo que quiera esa persona.
And Jerome, in that light, and when you look at it from the economic perspective, evidently this is an industry, it needs to generate revenue, so everyone is well paid, everyone has a very, I would say, much more than decent, probably excellent working conditions, which is what we all aspire as workers of somehow. The reality is that, I mean, you represent many different leagues, so many different realities, as you were explaining before. So it's very difficult to kind of draw a line what should be the minimum. But in terms of what could be the comfort line, in terms of how you approach the players as partners, to actually be able to not only help you construct the proper way of managing that relationship, but also how you split revenue with them eventually. How do you think of that?
This is a very complicated matter. At the same time, it's very simple concepts. To answer your question first and then make some observation, what we understand and when we look at our members, we realize that considering historical reasons, cultural reasons, economic reasons, every country, so every league has a different perspective and a different agreement or no agreement sometimes with their players. Now, in terms of the two observations I wanted to make, I mean, one is on the ownership of the data, the other one is on the purpose, what you're going to do with it. So first of all, Maeta said something that's very true, that when he read his contract, he wasn't able to understand what the contract said. So when first I was a lawyer, but completely outside football, and when I came in football, I remember having to deal with the image rights, which is, there's some similarities between data and image right, and it was very challenging to understand, and there's a Kafka saying that I really like, which says basically that an understanding of a matter and the opposite understanding of the same matter are not incompatible. So it means that when you read something and you want to be a lawyer, you can tell many different stories. Now, in terms of the ownership of the data, I mean, there's 4 possibilities. Either it's to the club individually, to the club collectively, which means the league, either to the player individually or to the players collectively. What we have to understand, not to forget in this industry, is that every penny that comes, or every euro, I should say, that comes into the industry, half of it, roughly, goes into player salaries anyways. So all this needs to be relative. Now, what I think, and when I was working at the French League, I always thought that a collective selling is more efficient. And that's what, as leagues, we try to do. And even when the rights, and that was the case of the image rights in France, but in other countries, even when the image rights were sold collectively by the union, we tried to get the union and the league together to sell it collectively because it's more efficient commercially. So I think those talks between the union and the leagues are anyway extremely important to make the most of the assets that you have. Now, in terms of the purpose, and that the second observation, there's two aspects in data. The one, and you said it, is health. Some data are so linked to the personal data of a player and health issues that I think now current regulation are extremely protective, and it's important that the industry takes into account that health perspective. And so there's health and there's commercial. There's all the rest that you need to commercialize. And I think, well, the player contract, the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement is the right place to deal with those issues.
A lawyer,
that was okay.
I mean, to be honest with you, I think that if we have a contract that the player cannot understand, I think we have a problem. So if it's drafted in a way where someone can understand, I think we have a problem as an industry. And second, I think what I wanted to say is not just that they don't understand, it's just that it's not, the consent provided is not what then it's used for. And as we know, I think in terms of the data, it needs to be very clear as to what you give and what you don't give. So if they really don't understand it, we have a problem as an industry. But my personal feeling is that even on the base that they do understand what is written, it's not then what the use does not correspond with whatever is written there. And I think that's where I think we need to have an honest discussion as to whether, we're not cheating ourselves as an industry, because ultimately if we want to go and really maximize the commercial opportunity, we need to be able to go to a commercial partner and say, I know exactly what I have. Yeah. And there's no risk of being attacked by a player, by a club, or by whoever who may think that maybe the rights which have been used have not been used as they should. But I share a lot of the thought that Jérôme has, so,
But this data, all this data discussion, when we negotiate CBA for a period of 4 years or 6 years, or it's discussed. This data issue is a new area. And so the fact that it's constantly evolving, it's quite obvious that when you sign a contract, and it's not only the case in football, new things come up, and that the parties that negotiate a contract maybe were not aware of at the time, and then you need to have this constant discussion. So
let me ask you a question.
Go ahead.
Do you think that if I, as a player of a championship club in the UK, do you think it's reasonable for me when I sign the contract to believe that my data will be sold to a betting company, to a health company, used by a scouting kind of company to make money? Is it a reasonable belief that when I sign the contract, I need to think, part of my salary will go to pay that scouting company, that health company, that gambling company, that program that this video game is putting together, which is going to actually use exactly all my medical information? It's something, I think it's a stretch, in my opinion, but lawyers are always lawyers, no?
I mean, it's not my position to enter into the debate, but I'm inclined to. But actually, it depends how you construct the business, right? Because actually, that's at least what I've learned from the CBA processes in the US is that actually you have a very, very clear definition on what the player sees, not only in terms of use of data or likenesses, but actually in terms of promotional time, how many times you can use my image or my presence in certain commercial relationships. And then, from that point on, then there's an individual conversation that needs to happen, which evidently goes towards the the summit of the pyramid, which are the star players and so on, which command more attention. But yeah, it's actually looking at it not necessarily from a legal perspective, or at least this is my point of view, and that's why I'm not a lawyer. It's actually looking at it from a economic and business structure, in how we can maximize revenue, minimize risk, and how can we have a more balanced distribution, right? And putting it right in, which is actually the tricky part. So it actually, and going back, so yendo al concepto general de las relaciones laborales, ¿no? En el contexto competitivo, hay un punto que creo que merece la pena que abordemos, que es el cómo, desde la perspectiva de jugadores y la propia perspectiva de las ligas, debe haber un compromiso mutuo para la preservación de la propia competición, ¿no? Es el lugar de trabajo, ¿no? Es esa entrega respecto de quiero seguir compitiendo, quiero que mi liga siga creciendo, quiero que mis clubes sigan creciendo, porque como jugador me va en ello, ¿no? Ahora que, bueno, hemos pasado ya varias épocas en los años recientes respecto de cómo esto se puede reestructurar, pero estamos en el, digamos, en el camino hacia otro cambio de formato competitivo a partir del año que viene, si no me equivoco, respecto de las competiciones europeas. ¿Cómo abordáis este proceso nuevo? Y sobre todo, y esto es una duda o un interés particular que creo que comparte mucha gente en la audiencia, que es cómo se está viviendo ese cambio industrial dentro del mundo del fútbol desde la perspectiva de los jugadores, ¿no?
Bueno, está claro que la industria está cambiando. Está claro que nosotros desde la parte social, por así decirlo, de la parte del jugador, nosotros hemos sido compañeros, hemos sido jugadores, sabemos perfectamente cómo funciona este mundo y sí que pedimos que la palabra del futbolista esté encima de la mesa. Hay diferentes conversaciones en el mundo del fútbol, ya sabemos cómo funciona FIFA, UEFA, CAF, donde creo que los futbolistas tienen muchísimo que decir. Está claro que al final esas competiciones que se hacen en el día de hoy, que cambian, al final no están siendo valoradas por los futbolistas. Nosotros tenemos la legitimidad de poder hablar, porque hablamos todos los días, cada año hacemos más de 600 vestuarios en España, en diferentes categorías, y nos estamos dando cuenta que tanto la Federación como la Liga, como UEFA o como FIFA, no están sintiendo lo que realmente quieren los futbolistas. Nos encontramos en situaciones donde toman decisiones unilaterales totalmente, donde los futbolistas no toman esa responsabilidad. Nosotros, lógicamente, como sabréis, estamos luchando para que eso cambie. Necesitamos competiciones nuevas, hemos hablado de salud, hemos hablado de convenios colectivos, hemos hablado de muchas situaciones que protegen al trabajador. Al final yo creo que las condiciones de trabajo son muy relevantes, muy importantes y necesitamos que esto siga mejorando. Y la única manera de que esto siga mejorando es también poner el foco en los que cada día se visten de corto, entrenan, juegan. Yo lo he dicho muchas veces y llevo 7 años ya en el sindicato de AFE y sí que me gustaría, y a lo mejor no es que sepa más de fútbol que nadie, pero sí que me gustaría que la gente que habla de fútbol, que algún día en su vida pueda vestirse de corto, puedan irse a un campo de fútbol y puedan intentar tirar un penalti para saber realmente la presión que pueda tener dentro de un campo de fútbol, lo que puede sentir un futbolista en cualquier categoría, ¿eh? Ya no te hablo a nivel profesional, simplemente en muchos tratos, porque de verdad llevamos tiempo ya luchando en esta circunstancia, nos sentimos en esa necesidad de formar parte real en el mundo del fútbol. Ya me diréis que, bueno, David, sois futbolistas, lógicamente ganáis un salario magnífico. Sí, en una parte del mundo sí, en otra parte necesitamos muchísimo más que mejore. Y ya no hablo a nivel de África, Asia, Sudamérica, hablamos de Europa en condiciones incluso de diferentes países que estamos muy cerquita, que tenemos muchísima diferencia entre nosotros por esos convenios colectivos que intentamos establecer con Wellbeing Forum, por ejemplo, o con las diferentes ligas que tenemos a nivel mundial, y es importante que el futbolista esté dentro de las decisiones. Nosotros en FIFA, por ejemplo, no estamos representados. Nosotros los futbolistas no tenemos dentro de la familia, y no es una queja, sino tenemos que estar en esas decisiones, en todos los comités, en situaciones, en intentar que las ligas puedan saber nuestra opinión para que esto crezca. La industria, está claro que el dinero es muy importante, de verdad. Es muy importante porque creemos que el dinero es muy importante, pero no lo es todo en este mundo del deporte. Los valores del deporte, la formación, la imagen que damos. Hemos visto situaciones en España que el mundo del fútbol mueve muchísimas personas y deja otras cosas importantes del país y se centra en el mundo del deporte. Entonces, sí que pido desde aquí que realmente esos futbolistas tengan cada vez más protagonismo, que confíen en lo que ellos realmente sienten, y creo que es la única manera de que esta industria va a seguir avanzando.
Y en línea con esto y con lo que comentaba Jerome, de realmente tener en cuenta cuál es el impacto, lo que hablábamos del workload, ¿no? También podríamos hablar de la estructura económica, es como un reflejo social, ¿no? No se puede legislar o no se puede regular solo para el 1%. Hay una clase media y una clase baja de desarrollo que realmente merece la oportunidad de poder evolucionar en el juego, ¿no? Entonces, respecto a esto, ¿cuáles serían cuestiones claves, quizás más específicas respecto de cómo involucrar a la clase media de los futbolistas, incluso pensándolo en las mismas ligas? No todas las ligas tienen el mismo poderío económico, ¿no?
¿Contesto yo?
Sí, sí.
¿En español? Yo creo que, como te he dicho, al final es verdad que hay diferentes países, Inglaterra, España, Italia, Francia, que tienen ligas que ya están muy preparadas, que son grandes países que lógicamente tienen muchísima influencia. Argentina puede ser un país, puede ser... O sea, tenemos diferentes... México, que está aquí presente también el presidente del sindicato. O sea, tenemos diferentes... Yo lo que creo que tenemos que ser solidarios. Y la palabra solidaridad tiene que aparecer siempre. Nosotros desde FIFPro, lógicamente la palabra solidaridad, el tema de intentar ayudar al más necesitado debería ser así. Nosotros, lógicamente, como Inglaterra y España, a lo mejor no tendríamos por qué luchar en ciertas batallas, pero sí que entendemos que debe de haber convenios colectivos en todos los países, tiene que haber relación laboral consolidada en diferentes países. No nos podemos encontrar con países que sean autónomos, nuestros compañeros, o situaciones que no tengan estructura deportiva para poder hacer su trabajo. O sea, está claro que no solamente hablamos de dinero, que el dinero es muy importante, pero sí que queremos que los derechos del futbolista o de la futbolista en este país, y creo que en España tenemos un claro ejemplo en los últimos días de que ya no se habla de derecho, ya no se habla de dinero, sino se habla de derechos, de temas de igualdad, de temas de transparencia, de temas de que realmente la gente que lidere y que puede tomar decisiones en el mundo del fútbol, que realmente las tome, que no jueguen a la política. Nosotros no queremos política, nosotros queremos hechos. Y la única manera de poder seguir en esta industria y poder participar y que todo esto que nos encanta a todos en diferentes sectores, porque todos vivimos de este deporte, de que realmente se cumpla. Y creo que tenemos que escuchar a todos, porque hay tarta para todos. Si es en el tema económico, seguramente haya tarta para todos. Pero sí que pido que las partes políticas queden a un lado para que realmente se puedan hacer hechos y podamos seguir mejorando.
Si me permite, yo creo que lo que dice David, que con lo que concuerdo totalmente, no es un tema de que tengamos que estar en la mesa porque sí. Yo creo que los jugadores tienen que estar en la mesa por dos razones principales, una comercial y otra deportiva. Y la comercial es que la realidad es que los niños hoy en día no siguen clubes, siguen jugadores. Y para mí no es una buena noticia para la industria, por mucho que ahora mismo me venga bien en mi rol actual, creo que no es una buena noticia porque lo que hace que el fútbol sea lo que sea es esa conexión casi religiosa con un escudo, con un campo, con unos colores que se está perdiendo y creo que no es buena noticia. Pero la realidad comercial es que hay jugadores, el delantero holandés del Manchester United, Weghorst, tiene más seguidores él que 3 clubes de la Premier juntos. Esa es la realidad. Y creo que todavía hay demasiados clubes y ligas que, como dicen en inglés, they live in denial. You need to stop living in denial and accepting that people follow players, not clubs. It's the sad reality of the current situation. Entonces, por lo tanto, el involucrar a los jugadores significa que ellos tengan más ganas de ser proactivos, se impliquen más en temas comerciales y, por lo tanto, la calidad del producto mejore y, por lo tanto, paguen más por los derechos y todo el mundo está contento.
Eso es.
Pero luego, si lo miras desde un punto de vista deportivo, es que ellos conocen el producto, ellos saben qué es lo mejor para el producto y, por lo tanto, su opinión es una opinión valiosa porque conocen mejor que nadie cómo mejorar el producto, si lo queremos llamar producto. Y de eso comentaba el otro día con Rafael Varane, por ejemplo, y creo que es una generación de jugadores muy diferente a lo mejor a la nuestra, es una realidad. Creo que son gente, iba a decir más inteligente, a lo mejor es un poco duro para nosotros, pero es gente que se preocupa, que está comprometida, que tiene acceso a la información que no teníamos y por lo tanto tú hablas con un Varane y no tienes por qué estar de acuerdo. Es un tipo que te argumenta las cosas, que, que sabe hablar y creo que es una oportunidad perdida para las ligas, para la UEFA y para la FIFA, no tener a un Rafael Varane en la mesa, porque creo que aporta. Y ahora mismo no está porque vivimos en ese mundo donde las ligas están aquí, los clubes están aquí, los jugadores están aquí, do whatever I'm telling you to do. Pero es que te estás disparando en el pie tú mismo, creo. Y por eso concuerdo totalmente con lo que dice David.
Jerome, what's your take on that, especially in leveraging that knowledge of the players, that it's a valid point, and actually how you can generate a more stable ecosystem that allows for a better and a deeper spillover effect to the different national ecosystems, I would say.
So I think there's maybe three aspects to mention. The first one is the structure. The second one is the governance, and the last one is an economic observation. On the structure, I think we need to accept that countries are very different, and a league, my new friends of the Botswana League, are never going to be the English Premier League. And I think we need to accept that, and we need not to pretend that everybody can be as powerful as the top big leagues in Europe. Some are progressing, they need to progress, but you can't copy what those are doing, and because just countries are different, history is different, economics are different, so I need to accept that. But what is true is in some countries, structures are missing to have proper professional football and to have also a counterpart to players, to speak with the players. In the most economically developed countries, usually you have a professional league, you have a counterpart for players. In some countries you just don't. Federations are running the show. They don't want a professional league for many reasons, political, economical, whatever. And you don't have the structure. And if you don't develop the structure, you will never get to it. The second is about the governance. So, and I completely concur to what Maheta and David say about the government, and that, as a matter of fact, especially at the international level, David mentioned that players are nowhere. Well, the good news is leagues are nowhere either. So we both represent the industry with all these thousands of players playing in domestic leagues. They're important. Domestic leagues are the bedrock of the industry. We're nowhere in the governance of football. Decisions are taken by federations, by confederations, by FIFA, and that's how it's regulated. Simple example, you mentioned basketball. Well, in basketball, governance is not international, it's club governance, it's CBA. Why? So if there's an international competition, well, the clubs and the players are discussed whether the player is going to go. That's not the case in football. If tomorrow there's a big international competition, clubs need to release their players, player needs to go. Full stop. So in terms of governance, I think there's a big improvement to make. Now, in terms of the economics, I'll insist on something I said before, which I think is extremely important. We should stop constantly focusing on elite football and thinking that it's what the fans want. That's not true. Fans are also very much attached to their clubs, and they want to follow their clubs, and their clubs need to have something to play. And saying all the time that if we develop super elite football, the trickle-down effect will give all of a sudden money to all the poor, it just doesn't work that way. And we know that economically speaking, that the trickle-down effect doesn't work. So it's extremely important to give space in the governance, in the calendar, to domestic leagues, and for players to have a counterpart that's strong enough.
Right. So we run out of time, and probably you noticed that we didn't touch into the elephant in the room much, which is the issues with women's football. But we thought that it wasn't right that four men were here lecturing, or how you say in Spanish, pontificar about that. I think that the common denominator and belief of us here and many other of the gentlemen that are here is that we are listening, to what is happening, and we're ready to support and act on it. That's the honest truth. I personally look forward that next year when we are discussing about players and leagues and things, at least we have a couple of female colleagues that are very well capable of actually engaging this conversation and be able to contribute to the growth of the industry. So David, gracias. Maeta, thank you very much, my friend. Jerome, thank you. It has been a pleasure to share the stage with you today.